Well, working on this undercarriage for this 8-passenger Yellowstone Park Stagecoach, we had put the hounds into the front axle cap, and I started putting the ironwork together, including these side braces. We stopped there, and I was heating and adjusting this right side iron, and something showed up. Remember, I told you it wasn't connected to the clip on this side, and I said, you know, there's a story here somewhere, and I'm still not sure what that story is. But we have a different length of iron on the right side than is on the left side. And it stood out when I was looking at these holes here. They're not right across from each other. They're staggered a bit. So I did some quick double checking, and from the outside of my axle to the corner, 44 3/4 there. This side here, I'm also 44 3/4. So our hounds are square with our axle. That's not the problem. These irons are just different in length. So I made sure that I had these clips at the same position. And I just measured from the edge to the edge of this one here was 6 inches, and it's also 6 inches on the other side. So if I just kind of a rough line measurement, go from the bolt of the axle clip to the hole on this side, this is the left side, I am 24 to maybe 24 1/8, just a straight line measurement. In double checking my clip placement here, I am also at 6 inches. And if I do that same straight line measurement, I'm at 24 1/2. So I'm about a 1/2 inch difference between each side. This is the center of the hole on the left side. So if I put a mark there, I've got a center line drawn through this pattern that I'm going to use for my tongue. So if I use that center line to draw this across, straight across, this other hole should be right here. But the center of this hole is right about there. So you can see I am 1/2 inch, almost 5/8 of an inch offset from this right side to the left side. So this side needs to be shortened back about this 5/8 of an inch. So it's back to the question is why? If this came off the same coach, why are these two braces different? But did they come off the same coach? Why was it disconnected from that axle clip on the right side? I don't know. That's the story that we don't know. But I need to adjust this. I'm going to just take and cut a piece out of this, shorten it up, bring this hole back to where it lines up straight across, because this has to be bolted clear through. And I'm not going to drill it on an angle and leave it the way it is. So I have to adjust this iron. So I bolted this back to the axle. Now I can take this hole and line it up where it needs to be in relation to the side on the right side. And I'm just going to trim this one off. I'll test fit that and make sure it fits. That'll put our hole in line. Get this welded up now. In order to get this close to the right position, I'm just going to put a center line mark right down here so I can line these up. And if I do my welding right, you'll never see where that weld was. That's going to line up much better. You see, this is the line that comes across from the left side. Lines right up now with the right side. So I guess what's remaining is to put the rest of the iron on this. I've got the bridge iron that goes underneath the axle, and I've got the original fifth wheel bolts. These two longer ones go through the axle hounds and also through the bridge irons. These shorter ones just go through the fifth wheel on each side of the donut. Three of these were pretty good. This one here was a little more rusted out in the middle, and I built that up with some brass, so I think that'll make that functional. And I also have the original bolts that went through the top iron on the sway bar or the stabilizer bar. This one is in pretty fair shape. This one has a little bit of rust and decay here, so I'm going to build that up with some brass as well, like I did the heavy fifth wheel bolt. And I suppose I could just build a new bolt and not have to go through this process. But when at all possible, I would like to salvage old bolts, especially specialty bolts like this. And if I clamp it in the nut, as I braze this, it allows me to rotate that and build this up with some brass all the way around. You know, a couple of videos ago, I was working on those dust shields on the rear axle. And I had commented that I've got this 1/8" brazing rod, and with that really fine thin metal, I think it's 25 gauge, I was kind of lamenting that I should have had some lighter brass. And lo and behold, one of you out there that watch, kindness of your heart, here shows up 1/8" and 3/32 brazing rod. You all just continue to amaze me, and it's pretty humbling, and I just appreciate the kindness of your hearts and the gestures that you often send, things that you see that could make my life a little easier here in the shop. Well, I'll let that cool down, file it down, and she'll be usable bolt again. Put a little paint on there, never know the difference. When I'm drilling long holes like this, you know, repeatedly you've watched me. I come from both sides, and any variation will be off in the middle a little bit. Well, especially when I have iron on both sides, I want to come in this direction. So these bolts are a 7/16 bolt. And if you happen to be just a fuzz off, You know, I could force a 7/16 bit through that. So what I did this time was I took a hot 3/8 rod and kind of opened up that little bit of variation. And the second step was with a 7/16 rod and burned that hole to where it is straight. So these two shorter ones go on the inside. These longer ones go through the axle hounds. So the reason I haven't bolted this back stabilizer bar yet is there's a bridge iron that goes on here. And the position of this hole here is going to make sure I have this in the proper position. You can see after I tighten this down, this doesn't come up to my front axle hounds. And the front of this bridge iron doesn't come down to my hounds either. And it's not really quite in line. As I line this back iron along with the axle hound, you can see how misaligned I am here up front. So this one is a little high, not quite as bad. And this one is a little closer to being correct. It's a little bit off. It just needs a minor adjustment. But it's interesting to me that this brace was the one that was off in length, and the side of this bridge iron is the one that is in the worst condition. It's fixable, but why would it both be on the same right-hand side? I don't know. So this end going to the back, I think I can just put it in the press and just bend that straight down. But you can see the smith work on this, how it has had a notch made in it that comes down and actually saddles that axle. The bolt just keeps it tight. But that's an interesting style of blacksmith work. That turned out pretty good there. I am going to try to relax this right through here, do it in the press, and then maybe I can bring that down. I'll see if I can get it close before I have to bring the torch in. Well, that's coming the right direction. I may have to increase the bend here, and maybe I can put a bend here and bring it down. That's not going to work. Well, I opened the bend down here instead of up here a little more, and I'm lined up here, and I'm right in the center on that axle hound there, which is kind of a pretty good deal. Once I'm tightened up, I may have to increase a little bit, because I'm still just a little bit high here. We're pretty nicely centered up right on that axle hound. And we're right in line with the tail end of these axle hounds. I think that one looks good. Well, this left side isn't so far off, so it should be a little easier to fix. Well, this iron is going to give us the location of the hole for the back of these bridge irons. But this is one of the case in putting this stabilizer bar on that it is kind of a domino effect. We have to have the right things in the right sequences. But I can start by drilling this hole. But underneath this bridge iron, there is another iron that has to fit on that hole as well. So it sandwiches up underneath this bridge iron. Then on the leading face of this, there's another hole. When I cut that off, I called it a screw, but it is actually a rivet. It's a 1/4 inch round head rivet that goes right through here. So in order to rivet that, I have to do that before I put this bridge iron on. This is the old hound, and you can see the round head rivet here that correlates with this hole on this iron. Now I'd like to mark where that hole is on my stabilizer. I drew a pencil mark here that's going to give me a placement of that hole. So I want that centered up. I'm just going to mark it. And since this has to match this top iron, I'm going to go off of my mark and make sure I'm in the right location here. This iron can't move, it has to be right where it needs to be. So it didn't end up being perfectly straight. It's about an 1/8 inch off, so I'm going to actually do this by hand and connect the dots in the middle again. So underneath this iron, there's a couple braces that come up to the axle hounds. So these have to set underneath so that they go through the same bolt hole. So it has to sit right in there. Doesn't go all the way through, so these were chiseled out and left this little shelf so it wasn't visible from the backside. So I'm going to pin these in place to make sure I get that notch in the right angle. We want it to follow the same angle as these hounds. These irons are about an 1/8 inch thick. So you just have to notch that in that thickness. So I'll try to get all this together at the same time. So this is the other bolt that has to be installed before that bridge iron can go on, because it covers up all of this. So the last piece of the puzzle should be able to go on. So there's two final bolts that go on the end of this sway bar iron. And then I had to cut these out, so I made two new ones. And of course I'll trim those off. Well, how many of you, when you go to buy a car or a pickup or truck or whatever, crawl underneath on the sales lot and look at the undercarriage or the chassis and say, oh, this is really interesting? It's seldom done, but that's what we're doing here. We're looking at the underneath side of this Stagecoach at the undercarriage, or what today we call the chassis. I'm always amazed at the engineering, not only just structurally, but the fashion and style of it in something so functional as the undercarriage of a Stagecoach. Anyway, appreciate you coming along. Thanks for watching.